Fit Lycan, and hello, it's Vo, and welcome to Magic Monday. This week we're going to look at alternative win conditions, and more specifically, milling. Milling our opponent means reducing the cards in their library to 0, so when they go to draw a card, and they have no cards in library, they lose the game. In this video I'll take you through the milling deck that we have on Duels. We'll have a look through the deck, and then afterwards we'll play a few games and see how it goes. So our first card in our deck is going to be Fog. We've got 4 copies of this, and this is half our strategy. Fog prevents all the combat damage that would be dealt this turn for only 1 green at instant speed. So we wait until our opponent is attacking with all the creatures, we cast Fog, and we take no damage from the creatures that turn. It stops creatures doing damage to each other, and more importantly, creatures doing damage to us. Next up, one of our few creatures, Jace Vryn's Prodigy, is a 0/2 for 1 and 1 blue, and has the ability that if you tap him, you can draw a card and then discard a card. Once we've got 7 cards into the graveyard, then he is exiled and transformed, flipped over, into Jace the Planeswalker. Jace the Planeswalker has a +1 ability to reduce the power of one of our opponent's creatures by 2, all the way until our next turn. He can go down to replay one of the instants or sorceries out of our graveyard, replay it again. If we use this ability to replay one of the instants or sorceries out of our graveyard, the card's exiled. That means that we can't keep replaying the same instant or sorcery over and over again. His ultimate ability helps with our milling strategy, that whenever we play a spell, our opponent mills cards. We won't always get up to using the ability, but if we can get up to that ultimate, it's really going to lock our opponent out of the game, and it's going to help our milling strategy get to its goal a lot faster. Thing in the Ice we saw in our combo deck. For 1 and 1 blue we get a 0/4 wall, and when we cast 4 instants or sorceries, it transforms into the Awoken Horror. We're probably going to be able to play the 4 instants or sorceries. We don't have a lot of creatures in the deck, we do have several enchantments, but we should be able to play enough instants or sorceries to be able to flip the wall and attack him with the Awoken Horror, should it come down to that. Next up we have Commencement of Festivities. Very similar to Fog, it prevents all damage that creatures would do to players this turn. So this differs slightly from Fog. If we have one big creature, like our Awoken Horror, and our opponent is attacking him with many creatures, if we play Commencement of Festivities and block one of the creatures successfully with the wall, then the creature that's blocked with the wall will die, and the rest of the creatures will do no damage to us, personally. So we can still make blocks if they're good blocks for us, or if we don't have any decent blocks to make, we could still let it all through and play Commencement of Festivities just like a Fog. Just like in our combo deck, we've got 4 copies of Take Inventory. Again, it's going to help us draw cards over the course of the game, generate card advantage. Along with that, we've got 2 copies of Cathartic Reunion. Cathartic Reunion requires us to discard 2 cards at the same time as we cast it to draw 3 cards to replace them. So we've got to have a couple of cards in hand to be able to use Cathartic Reunion. If we're drawing off the top and we've got no cards in hand and we only draw Cathartic Reunion, we're going to have to wait until we get a couple more cards before we can use it. Our next card is Jessian Thief, just a 1/of. For 2 and a blue we get a 1/3 prowess creature. Whenever he attacks and deals combat damage to a player, then we get to draw a card. If we attack with untapped mana, often our opponent will think twice about blocking it, because we can play an instant which will trigger the prowess ability and turn our thief into a 2/4. So often if we attack with this 1/3, our opponent's not going to block it because they fear us playing something which acts as a combat trick. So that a lot of the time they're going to let this through and we're going to be able to draw that extra card. Reclamation Sage is good in case we're against a similar opponent to us, an opponent using lots of enchantments or artifacts to win the game. When Reclamation Sage comes into play, we get to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. this is the guy that we really don't want to see our opponents play, because our main strategy is based around Sphinx's Tutelage. Sphinx's Tutelage, for 2 and 1 blue, is an enchantment that whenever we draw a card, our opponent has to mill 2. If those 2 cards are both non-land cards and they share a colour, our opponent has to repeat this process. This won't happen very often. A lot of the time it's quite simply we draw a card, our opponent mills 2. But we're going to draw so many cards with this deck that our opponent's library should be shrinking so quickly that between this and the fogs, we can hold our opponent off until we've got rid of all the cards in their library and they lose the game. Sphinx's Tutelage is one of my favourite cards. It's very fun to build decks around, and it's a fun alternative strategy, a different way to win the game. Fevered Visions pairs very well with Sphinx's Tutelage. For 1 colourless, 1 blue and 1 red, we get an enchantment that says at the beginning of each player's end step, they draw a card. So if we have Sphinx's Tutelage out, we mill them once at the start of our turn and once at the end of our turn. If it's our opponent's end step, when they draw their card, if they then have 4 cards in their hand or more, they take 2 damage, and we can even redirect that 2 damage onto a planeswalker that they control. So it's very powerful. If we only have Fevered Visions out, we're going to be able to draw extra cards to find our Sphinx's Tutelage, and if we have both out, then it doubles the speed at which we mill our opponent out. Next we have a simple counterspell, Broken Concentration. Counter target spell, any spell, it doesn't matter if it's a creature, an enchantment, an instant, or a sorcery. We're playing this one over many similar counter spells that have the same converted mana cost, because it has a madness cost. This means that if this is one of the cards that we have to discard, either because we have 8 cards in our hand at the end of our turn, or because we play something like Cathartic Reunion that makes us discard cards, if we discard that card, we can play it for its madness cost at the time. Same with Fiery Temper. We can either play it as an instant for 1 and 2 red to do 3 damage to target creature or player, but if we have to discard it with either Cathartic Reunion or Jace when we draw a card, discard a card, any reason if we have to discard a card, if this is in our hand and we have 1 spare red untapped, then we can discard the card and play it, and then it's not a total waste having to discard the cards. Radiant Flames, much like in our combo deck, we've got in to sweep away any token strategies, or if our opponent has lots of small creatures, we can burn them all away in 1 move. Help clear the board. Collective Defiance was also in our combo deck. For 1 and 2 red, we can either do 4 damage to a target creature that our opponent controls, 3 damage to them, or perhaps a planeswalker they control, or we can choose for target player to discard their entire hand and draw that many cards. We might be more interested in this mode in this deck rather than the combo deck, because if we have Sphinx's Tutelage out and we discard our hand to draw that many cards, we're going to get up to 7 triggers on our Sphinx's Tutelage. Next up, we've got Talent of the Telepath. For 2 and 2 blue, we get our opponent to reveal the top 7 cards of their library. We get to pick an instant or sorcery from that pile and play it ourselves for free. If we have Spell Mastery, which we often will, then we get to pick 2 instants or sorceries from this pile to play ourselves for free. Those spells go into our opponent's graveyard along with all of the other cards that have been revealed. So even if there's no instants or sorceries in that pile of 7, at the very least we've put 7 cards from their library into their graveyard and got us closer to the end. So at very least it's a mill 7, but often in awkward situations where you really need a spell to kill one of your opponent's creatures, you can use one of their spells against them, and there's nothing worse than getting defeated by one of your own cards. Next up we have Torrential Gearhawk. He is a flash creature, so we can play him at any time that we could play an instant. So if our opponent's swinging in with a 4/4 and we've left all our mana untapped, we can afford him. we can play Torrential Gearhulk as our opponent is swinging in, and make a good block with a 5/6 creature. Whenever he comes into play, we get to look in our graveyard at any instance that we might want to replay for free, like Fiery Temper to burn away one of our opponent's creatures, or perhaps Commencement of Festivities, so that we can make our good block, and then the rest of the creatures that are attacking us do no damage. Again, we can always fall back on defeating our opponent with just creatures if we have to. If our Sphinx's Tutelage plan isn't quite working out, he's still a good 5/6 that we can defeat our opponent with by swinging in with him. Our last non-land card is Rise from the Tides, again one that we saw in the combo deck. We should have enough instants or sorceries in the deck to make it worth it. We'll get less than we did in our combo deck in terms of zombies created, but it should still be worth it, and again a good plan if everything's going wrong and we don't get any of our key cards. So again, like in the other deck, we've got some basic lands. We've got islands, mountains and forests, and then we've got our first non-basic here, Lumbering Falls. Lumbering Falls comes into play tapped. It can provide us with either a green or a blue mana, but its more important function, if we spend 2 1 green and 1 blue, we can turn it into a 3/3 hexproof creature until the end of turn, so we can either attack or block with it if we have the mana, and because it's hexproof it can't be the target of spells or abilities. It's handy in a pinch if we don't have the creatures. Same with Wandering Fumarole. It comes into play tapped, can provide us a red or a blue, but for 2 1 red and 1 blue, we can turn it into a 1/4 creature until the end of turn, and instead of having hexproof, the ability with this creature is that for 0 we can switch the power and toughness so it can become a 4/1. So if our opponent has no creatures on board to block with, or they've tapped their creatures in attacking us, then we can turn this into a 4/1 and attack them for 4, get into a planeswalker or attack them personally. Also helps in the blocking stage. If we turn it into a 1/4, our opponent's attacking us with a 3/3, we can block, we keep our land, and we take no damage. Cinderglade helps us get to our 3 colours of mana as fast as possible. It comes into play tapped unless we already have 2 basic lands on the field, but it can provide either red or green, and as I say, help us get to access of all 3 colours of mana we need. Hinterland Harbour we had in the combo deck, does the same thing, can provide us with either green or blue mana, but it comes into play tapped unless we already have a forest or an island. Sulphur Falls, the same, comes into play tapped unless we already have an island or a mountain, but provides us with either blue or red mana. Our last non-basic land is Gearreach Sanitarium. Provides us with either 1 colourless mana, or we can pay 2 and tap it, and each player draws a card, then discards a card. As we get rid of the cards in our opponent's library and they start to get short, they really won't want to draw a card because it brings them closer to the end of the game. We always want to draw a card, especially when we have Sphinx's Tutelage out, because that's going to again get them closer to the end of the game by getting rid of the cards in their library. And it's a very fun strategy, milling your opponent out rather than winning the game conventionally. It's very satisfying to do. So we'll go ahead, we'll try and battle some human opponents if the versus system is working again. If not, we can play against the computer a few times and we'll do a little demonstration. We'll hopefully be able to mill our opponent out a few times. As usual, I'll put up that video of that gameplay later on in the week, ahead of next Magic Monday, where we'll have a look at the new game, Arena. Until then, take it easy, good luck in your games of Magic, and we'll see you soon.